Not trying to gas this guy up before he comes on, but I'm dead serious. He's one of my favorite guys to get on. When I see him on other pods, I'm always like, ooh, nice. I save it. So I want the good. Jason Bukala, hockey and prospect analyst for Sportsnet, 14 years as an NHL scout and former Panthers director of amateur scouting. What's up, brother? How are we doing?
Good morning. Doing fantastic, except we're getting like a tornado almost in London in February, which seems kind of bizarre, doesn't it?
I mean, I don't know anything about tornadoes. I don't know how they work. I don't know how it happens. I've never been a part of one. The closest thing I can say that I've been to a tornado is like sometimes, when you see it like in a gutter, like it's a little spinning. You see like a bag spinning. That's the closest. That's all I know about them. And the movie Twister. I don't know the difference between a hurricane and a tornado. I have nothing. Yeah, no knowledge on the subject.
It's just bizarre. I mean, it's crazy this weather. It's like, I don't know. Anyways, if a window caves in the back of my house here, we'll just keep working through it, pal. We're pros. We'll keep going.
You're a pro. Don't include me in this. I never claim that. Okay, well, you're in London, so this is the way to start it is, okay, Easton Cowan at the draft and heading into the draft, you look across the board, he was evaluated by most as a pretty significant reach for the Maple Leafs when they took him in the first round. It was kind of a near consensus from people that he was a either late second to early third round talent. So to just start this thing off, what did we miss? Because now he's dominating. And, for someone like me that doesn't have enough time to watch junior hockey, sometimes you look at stats and you go, like, how much of this is actually, wow, he's really taken a step versus he plays on an awesome London team. But where are you at just sort of with the year that he's had and how, his draft stock seemingly was misevaluated by so many?
Well, I mean, I put myself in that category as well. I think on my final draft list, he ended up somewhere around 40 in my rankings.
That's way higher than most people had him. I think the highest I saw him was 36, but the average, I averaged it out of the major publications to, I think it was 58.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know what? First of all, good on the Leafs for obviously doing their due diligence. And, I'm sure that there was a lot of contact with Dave Morrison and Mark Hunter, for example, obviously to dive real deep into the back end character of the player and, how he's been trending and what his commitment's like behind closed doors, stuff that we don't see. All teams do that, but, Mo's been doing it for so long for Toronto and living, in this region. I'm sure that him and Mark had some real good conversations. But listen, it's on the player, and the player from the second, let's just call it New Year's last year till the end of the year, he earned the trust of Dale Hunter and was thrown into all situations with the London Knights down the stretch last year, and clearly rode that momentum into his draft selection, which was, it was a high pick. Let's be honest. Like anything in the 20s for him, you said it best. It was surprising, I guess you could say. But now, fast forward to today, and I mean, he's on the point streak that he's on. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the longest point streak of any London Knight in the history of the franchise. And
internet era, they're framing it as, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in the internet era. So, but even in that era, like holy jump, and look at the players that have come through there. So, hey, this kid's fun to watch. He gets better every week.
Yeah. Like, what is the ceiling of the guy now, though? Like, was the issue when he was drafted that people didn't view him as a higher ceiling player? Like, why was he so low?
I would say that at that time, I didn't see what I would qualify as on the horizon potential elite offense. What I did see, though, was two-way energy, dog in the fight all the time type of a player, someone that you could rely on in the middle of the lineup, kill penalties. Worst case scenario, press up against the top lines in the checking role. Yeah. And at best, hopefully provide, better than secondary offense. But I didn't see what he's doing right now. And he's not in the NHL yet. So let's temper our expectations a little bit. But hell, he had a great training camp too. Like this isn't just like a month's worth of work here. This is significant. So what you have now, JD, is you have a play driver who plays exceptionally hard between the whistles. Relentless is the way that I would best describe it. And that's the starting point when you're scouting players, for me anyways, at the NHL level is if you can't skate, you can't think, and you don't have relentless compete, none of your other skill attributes really matter, because on your worst day, and it's a hard league, you better have those three things going, right? You better be able to skate, you better be able to think, you better always be a relentless competitor. He's got that in spades, and then, of course, he's doubling down with the offense.
Yeah, so basically all this is nobody really thought he had this offensive package, and it seems to be one that is actually him, not just a byproduct of the London Knights. Not
a byproduct of the London Knights. He's been given all the opportunity there, but in London, you earn it. You earn it, and you do that with a lot of, you do that with any team, but, historically in London, like especially in your draft year, a lot of players don't get given what he was given last year. It has to be earned, and he's just gone to another level.
Okay, so last one on him is, so he's still 18 years old. I think this is probably the best way for a casual observer to understand it. I know that because that's me. So I'm asking for me. If he was in the draft this year, where would you slot him? Like, is he a top 5 pick if he's in the draft this year then?
Oh, he's a top, and that's a great question. So he's definitely a top 10 pick in this draft cycle, based on what I see for the quality of this draft. Of course, the caveat is that we know, it's fascinating. I'll put it to you this way. Imagine he was a late birthday guy. Like, he was a guy that was born beyond September 15th last year, and this would have been his draft cycle.
Yeah,
he'd be right there, man. Like, he'd be, like, I've got Carter Yakimchuk, who's a big right shot defenseman from the Calgary Hitmen, like 6th on my list right now. I would probably have to say, if you put me on the spot, he's a right shot. I would put him right behind Yakimchuk. He's going to be 6 or 7 probably overall right now in this draft class.
So I think that's important for people, because, again, he is 18 years old. So, like, if you're trying to evaluate, what his worth is to an organization, it's a top 7 pick in this year's draft, which the way that you've described it from your writing is it's top heavy. Teams like the top 20. And then after that, it's a pretty significant drop-off where teams want to have a multitude of picks. And so what that means for the Leafs and what they have with their first rounder is the fair assessment, it's not even as valuable as a normal year's first rounder would be. Not even close. So this is how I've been positioning it. So if I'm whoever, let's say the Toronto Maple Leafs want Noah Hanifin, okay? And let's go the other way, because Hanifin's going to be more expensive. Let's go Tanev. So the Toronto Maple Leafs want Chris Tanev, and everybody's getting in a knot about the fact that we might have to give up our first rounder, and apparently that's what they're waiting on. Calgary's waiting on who's going to step up first and say, here's my first round pick. We want Chris Tanev. If that happened, I'd want to have a chance to talk to the agent and the player to see if I could get an extension in the drawer ahead of time, because obviously that just makes good business sense, right? To try and do that, especially because Tanev has a no trade. He's got like a 10 team, I think, in his contract. But here's where I'm going with it. If you traded away a late round, first round pick for Chris Tanev in this draft cycle, on balance, everybody gets, upset about that. Don't get upset about that. There was a time where I didn't think the Leafs were in a position to, maybe do that. I didn't know if it made sense. This latest run where I've seen better depth scoring, a little bit more balance in the lineup, made me believe, okay, maybe. But if they do decide to do it, I'm not all that upset about it, because trust me, Calgary's asking for Easton Cowan. Calgary's asking for Easton Cowan if it's Hanifin, or they're asking for Fraser Minton. That's what's happening in this draft cycle. If I'm on the other side of the fence, I'm asking for top prospects instead of late first round picks, because I recognize that the value of the prospect trumps that value of the late first. Do you think for the Leafs, both of those guys are untouchable?
I don't think Minton's untouchable. I would suggest to you at this stage that Cowan is untouchable. I think Minton is a really good player, but he's a 2.5 on his best day. He's probably a 3. Okay, like he's a solid 3 on projection, 2.5 on his best day. Where Cowan can play in the top 6 and projects better that way. Like, Cowan can score more than Nyes is going to score, but he's going to play with he's going to be Nyes light in the hard areas. He's going to be tenacious. He's going to be in the fight. You know what I mean? Like along the wall and doing those types of things. I've used this loosely, and I don't want everybody to get too excited, but he's kind of like a modern day version of like a Darcy Tucker. Like Darcy Tucker's era was different. The game was played different back then. Understand that now, you know how Tucker was always in it? Like this guy's going to be always in it, and he's going to score. So that's why he's a top 6 for me. And Minton's the guy that's kind of like, okay, well, maybe I'd listen on him.
Hey, Jason, we're going to clip that. Okay, so beyond those two, though, right? Because those two soak up all the headlines. They're both on the Canadian junior team. We got to look at Minton. He looked way ahead of schedule. And I think most Leaf fans understand, what he is supposed to be. Even when he broke camp with the team, which is kind of nuts to think about in hindsight. Yeah, it was with the understanding of this guy is going to eventually end up, hopefully, as a good checking forward, a good depth forward, or a good depth center, which, would have a lot of value to this Leafs team, especially in the cap era. But there's a couple of other names. Like I was asking people who follow this stuff more closely than me, and the two names that kept coming up is the kid in the KHL, Grebionkin, and Noah Chadwick. Do you kind of look at those two guys? And then I guess there's Topi Niemela, who's also had a pretty solid year. Do you look at any of those guys as major leap players or guys that actually you view highly? Or is that sort of just still way too early to tell, depth fodder? Like, what is your assessment of those three or the rest of the Leafs' depth? I can't sugarcoat this in relation to the landscape of the league, because when you're doing business, that's what you have to do, right? You have to look like, where am I shopping? And below average, like across the board. So it's Noah Chadwick. He's on the uptick. So he at the beginning of the year, I was at the Prospects tournament in the States there in Traverse City, and I could see it, like he was a little Bambi-ish, he had the size, he was involved, you could see he was processing everything, but everything just had to get a little bit quick. Great experience for him. He was there, he played against some pros in a hectic environment. Fast forward, his offense has gone up, his skating is definitely improving. His processor is still definitely there. It always has been, and it's getting better and better in relation to making. When you're a defenseman, like you have milliseconds. People don't. When we see it on TV from up top, it's like, oh, they got time. When you're down on the ice, trust me, like it's crazy hectic. It's hard. It's really fast. So when you're a defenseman, that processor better be on point, right? So he's got that, and he's getting much better. I'm always, kitty by the door on the Russian situation. Grebionkin, I forget, however you want to pronounce it. He's a guy I got to wait on, but his statistics are outstanding. Like it's a hard league to score in the KHL. He's one of the things I do like, JD, is he's a bigger body, right? Like we went through a time in Toronto where we had a lot of smaller guys. They seemed like we had cookie cutters coming through a little bit, like all around the same size. Yeah. So this kid here, he's like 6'2", I don't know, he could be 190 by now for all I know. And equal parts goal scorer, playmaker. So playing in Magnitogorsk brings me around this. So Magnitogorsk is like a good strong program over there, but it's not SKA. So SKA is like the Montreal Canadiens and Toronto Maple Leafs, and players tend to, and the teams that play right in Moscow, like Moscow, they tend to stay, if you know what I mean. Like there's more pressure on them to stay there. Sure. Where he's playing in Magnitogorsk might give him, I think the Leafs have a better chance of bringing him over. I'm trying to be politically correct here. Yep. And then beyond that, things start to kind of. You talked about Niemela. So, Niemela, what is Niemela going to be? So he's a right shot D. He's smart. He's mid-size. He can play in a variety of roles. I think he's an NHL player, but I think he's a bottom pairing guy. And I think some teams, it doesn't fit their mold because for his size, he's not elite offensively. And so then they have to say, okay, like, how does that fit the way that we want to play the game? And I know those are kind of long-winded answers. No, that's perfect. This is why I save it, and this is why I want to check in with you about these guys over longer stretches of time. Because I'll be honest, I don't really trust a lot of prospect assessment with hockey. Especially during the internet era, and especially in the market where, and I'm not trying to be offensive to people, but in the market where we overhype everybody, right? Like everybody's the next big thing. And so sometimes it's just good to ground yourself into the reality of like, hey, what is this actually? And every fan base overrates their prospects. Like that's just a natural thing because you get attached to them and you feel a certain way and you start to dream on what they could be. But this is good because the Leafs are entering a deadline where you mentioned it. They've looked a lot better. They just put together a 7-game winning streak. There's a real proof of concept with the group that you could see into a playoff series now that they're getting more from their depth and their stars are humming and their power play looks better and they're getting some saves. And yet it kind of feels like, okay, so if we're doing this as a full list or a Coles notes of this, they got an untouchable guy who's been their breakout this year, but yeah, they don't want to trade him. They've got one other dude who's good, not great, maybe available in a trade. Eye of the beholder a little bit in terms of what he could be worth, but he's probably going out the door if you're making a major move because the first round pick isn't worth much. And the rest of the depth is there hasn't been some other Easton Cowan type where they've completely exceeded expectations and completely risen up basically the consensus prospect board. Yeah,
that's well said. And that's exactly the strategy that people have to understand, that's going on across the league. And and that's why, like, if I'm an executive with the Toronto Maple Leafs, knowing what I know about the draft now, that's why I'm, okay, the first round pick, obviously you want to have it. Like, let's not discount it. It's still like you want to have a swing at the plate. I get that, right? But, having said that, that's why you're more willing to enter that into the equation. There's other guys in the organization, like the Moldenhauer kid who's at the University of Michigan. He was drafted 95th overall, I think, in like 2022. Like he hasn't taken the next step for them either. I was at Michigan a week and a half ago, and I was hoping to see more out of him. They drafted him out of the Chicago Steel, and so it's tough, JD. I'm telling you, like that underbelly to increase the value of a trade to say, okay, this can get us over the top outside of Minton and Cowan. Really difficult, pal.
Yeah. So, by the way, for those wondering, you also did poll in one of your latest pieces. You polled another 8 scouts, and a lot of them feel the same way about you when it comes to this draft in terms of the how it sort of breaks down. Last one for me is just okay. The Leafs have 7 picks with the 4th round and on, so their scouts and their department is still going to have to do a lot of work because there's a lot of lottery picks that they're going to have to make, but. How frustrating is it for a room and as a director or just any scout when your team doesn't have a lot of those top tier swings and you've basically got to do all your work from the 4th round on?
You know what? I never approached it as being frustrating. I always looked at my situation in Florida was different because we were trying to build the foundation to work our way through, right? But before I was in Florida, I worked in Nashville, and David Poile always valued picks. He always wanted to pick picks, or he wanted to keep his picks. But here's what I'm saying is that it's if we as a team aren't on the cusp of going beyond the first round, like if we're not really, in that group, everybody that says, well, let's make playoffs, see if we can go on a run. I get that. That's fine. Not everything's going to happen the way the Florida Panthers, had it happen last year. But if I'm not going to be like a second round type of franchise and beyond, I wish I had more at the top because I feel like if we're in, but we're close to being better, I need a couple more swings to try and get another Easton Cowan or, whoever you want to throw it out there. So the Leafs got a lot of picks in the back half of the draft. Essentially they're loaded from the 4th to the 7th. They have 3/5 this year. Yeah. So the strategy here, JD, would be, for me, if I'd like a guy in the 3rd, like I really like a guy in the 3rd, I'm packaging up a couple of those 5ths and seeing if I can't get a bump with maybe maybe I take my 4th and one of my 5ths, say Calgary's if they don't make playoffs because they own their pick, and you move up into the 3rd and you get more swings that way higher in this draft cycle. Failing that, though, here's the strategy. Because, like you said, you don't feel great about this draft. I try and see if somebody else loves this draft more. And as crazy as it sounds, I punt it down a year and I get more picks for next year. Like 1 pick this year turns into 2 next year in a better draft cycle.
Yeah. Hey, Jason, again, always appreciate the insight. I think, definitely I do. And I hope the audience gets a little smarter when you come on. Thanks for making time, buddy.
Anytime, pal. Anytime. Thanks. Thank you for having me on. And talk some more here after the trade deadline, hopefully.
Absolutely. Jason Bukala, hockey and prospect analyst for Sportsnet. Again, 14 years as an NHL scout, former director of amateur scouting for the Panthers, and long resume. Again, this is, if you go read his stuff, he sources it with a lot of different people. It's not just his own opinion as like a one guy, even though the resume is Yeah, pretty outstanding as a scout.